Well, for more on what to make of President Duterte's address and China's approach, we're joined now by CCTV political and economic affairs commentator Einar Tangen. He's joining us now from Beijing. And we were trying to get a hold of Ryan Meltzer, who had some trouble with the live shot. But talk to us a little bit about what's going on in Laos, the ASEAN meeting. It's interesting, Wang Yi, the foreign secretary for China, was there, as was John Kerry, the Secretary of State for the United States.
Well, you're seeing great powers going at it. I mean, you have to understand and go back a little bit and to understand what is at stake here. Back in the 1930s, the United States wanted to enlarge its seabed, or not sea, its sea territory by claiming greater than 3 miles. That had been the norm back then. In 1945, they declared a 200-mile economic exclusive zone. And this has set off a number of events which has led to UNCLOS. So what happened is this desire to seize rights, economic rights of the sea, has kind of been playing out as we have seen it. For China, back in the 20s, when they, fledgling republic, put their claims together through this map, it was not clear exactly what it meant. But at that time, it was not really that much noticed. Today, it is noticed and it is being litigated.
And let me ask you about the arbitration tribunal's ruling. How much do you think that impacted this ASEAN meeting?
Well, it obviously had an impact, but the real question is, what you're seeing here is a play out between what's called the Westphalian state system. This was going back to Europe, when they were having wars between Republicans and, I mean, not Republicans, slip of the tongue there, between Protestants and Catholics. And they decided that they would create legal states out of what had been territories ruled by princes, kings, and emperors. And that's quite different from the civilization states that you have in the East. In the East, it's really the way to solve things is the way that ASEAN does it, which is this idea of consensus. Everyone gets together, and when everybody agrees, you have a solution. The legalistic way of doing it, which is the Western way, is there are winners and losers and tribunals. Unfortunately, probably the legalistic method does not work here because there's no way of enforcing it. So issuing a judgment that no one will follow, or that in this case the U.S. is not even a part of, although it is pushing, is very nebulous. It's not something that can probably continue over the long time. Also keep in mind that the UN Convention of Laws of the Seas is not actually an expression of the UN. It was organized as a separate entity. And this has a very big impact because people perceive that this is international law when it actually is just a convention that was meant to be arbitrated by two parties when it comes to sovereign issues, not by single parties seeking a benefit.
You know, it's interesting, ASEAN member Cambodia supported China, of course, and they're saying that may have been a key factor in keeping talk of this ruling out of the joint statement. How key was it, do you think?
Well, both Cambodia and Laos have been supportive. Now, keep in mind, these are both landlocked countries, and their desire is to make sure that this area that they have to reach indirectly is open to all. So they have very, very vested interests simply because they do not have seacoasts. Now, the claimants in this case who do have seacoasts are simply trying to do, they want to have as much economic, legal rights as they possibly can. But as I said, this is all kind of being pushed by this legalistic notion that you can settle these things. Everything that we're talking about, the UN Convention of Laws of the Seas that we're talking about, was instituted in 1982. This is not a long historical process. This is simply something that's come into effect recently and is now being tested in ways which, unfortunately, cannot be enforced.
Now, let's talk a little bit about...
And in terms of Laos and Cambodia, keep in mind, this is, again, an example of this consensus process. Without everybody signing on in ASEAN to a joint statement, it cannot be issued. And this is one of its strengths, although in some quarters of the world they would say this is a bit of a weakness.
Well, let me ask you about Duterte, because in his address, he says he's going to continue to push for diplomacy with China in the wake of this arbitration ruling. How important is that, and how does he basically navigate this relationship with China and the United States, do you think?
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, if you remember 2 weeks ago, he was using the stick. He had an offensive. He signaled that he was changing his military goals away from the South China Sea and maritime issues and more towards internal factors. I think the recent moves indicate that he's very much of a pragmatist. He's looking to consolidate inside. He wants to deal with corruption and crime, as he said in his throughout his campaign, but he's also very interested in the economic situation. And as said before, the cooperation with China is very, very important. Now, the U.S. is not completely sidelined, as you saw. Kerry will be there, but in terms of navigating this, I think he's putting the Philippines' economic situation, both economically and socially, in terms of safety, first.
Thanks so much for your perspective and joining us from Beijing. Really appreciate it.